smell something? I smell packets. We're going to talk about sniffers. Now, as far as where we are in the Certified Ethical Hacker, this can be in a variety of places. This could be reconnaissance data at the very beginning. You could be capturing packets there. It could be privilege escalation, listening on the wire for clear text passwords that were flowing across. It's not really the browsing the system, although it could be browsing the network of that organization. As far as maintaining control, I don't know that sniffing can help you maintain control, but more information is a good thing. So we kind of flow around sniffers, and when we talk about sniffers, you need to understand what they are, how they work, the mechanical portion of it, because there is a physicality to this, and you also need to know about the technology of it and understanding active and passive sniffing. And then what we'll do is, once we understand how to use the tool, and the tool is Wireshark, you can use other network monitors, but Wireshark is the one that we discuss here and the one that the EC Council expects you to know for your exam. But after that, then what we want to do is we want to say, okay, with this data, what could we do? So we flip over to the evil side and start talking about ARP spoofing, redirection, DNS, IP spoofing, little HTTP sniffing, and showing how all this stuff works together. Generically, a sniffer is a network card listening to all packets. That's called promiscuous mode. Normally what happens on our network cards when they're physically attached to the network, all the bits are flying across the network, especially in a contention-based Ethernet network. They're flying across the network, and the bits come up to the card, and the thing that is introduced to them is the MAC address of this particular data packet that's coming across. This frame that's coming across. Sorry, it's not a packet. It's a frame at that point that flows across. And that frame gets to your network card, and your network card looks at it and says, there are one of two options here. If it's a broadcast frame, I'll take it. Or if it's a directed to my network MAC address, I'll take it. Everything else, as soon as it realizes that it's not its MAC address, that it's not a broadcast, it should let it go. That's if it's going across that wire. Promiscuous mode says, I'll take everything that comes my way. That's why it's sniffing. You're going to need a software program or a hardware device. We use a combination of hardware and software that's built into the operating system, and that also that we download the wireless. We download Wireshark. But there are some tools like Fluke and a whole bunch of others out there that do all of this stuff with basically a handheld meter. It does it all in one. It's a single device. What we're going to do is we're going to have those tools, and we're going to listen on the network. We can listen at any layer. We are always listening a layer 2 and capturing that information, and then we're examining as it gets up in there. We could look at the raw hex of it, or we could resolve it, translate it, and make it easier to read. Now let's be clear, we're not intercepting or altering. All we're doing is catching the packets as they grow across the wire. We're not taking them away from anybody else, and we're not changing them in what we're doing. Now that's in the evil part. Okay, here's the security context of it. Here's the problem that we as penetration testers are trying to solve. Clear text happens on networks. We just don't want that clear text information to be very valuable so that an attacker could use that information or abuse that information. Now remember, if you can run a sniffer, so can everyone else. There are tools out there that will detect a network card in promiscuous mode. They are specialized. So in my first course, when I sat down and listened to Stephen Northcutt of the SANS organization discuss, this was kind of far back, he said, you should be reading it in hex. You should be reading the raw packets. You should be able to understand it that way. You should look at those packets flowing across that wire and get it. And I went, yeah, I mean, you could, but then you'd spend all your time doing the translations in your head. And I said, why not read it in a form that works for me as a human being, you know, and have some interface interpret that or translate that for me? He said, well, what happens if that interpreter is corrupt? Or what happens if that interpreter doesn't know what is being offered to it? I said, you got a point. I said, but then at that point, what I would say is, for the bang for the buck, I'm looking at all my packets, and when they're misinterpreted, I would recognize that in the interface because there would be errors, and then I would go down to the hex level and look at it there. 99.9% of the time, the interface is going to translate it correctly. And he said, well, what happens about that 0.1%? I said, I can't be worried about that. I mean, I just have to go ahead and fight the battles that I can win. And he said, well, but you could just learn heck looking at it that way, and it should be fine for you. I said, well, I got other things to do besides security. I actually want to do something else. He said, okay, that's your choice. I think that you would go blind if you looked at this stuff all day long, and that's really the problem, is that it gets a little overwhelming. So the tool that I suggest is using a protocol analyzer inside of the operating system, communicating with the operating system to get the raw data from the network card. That tool is Wireshark. It's graphical, it can reconstruct streams, it has great filtering features, and there's actually a new tool out there called CloudShark that is browser-based. You can actually do your raw packet captures with PCAP or TCP capture and actually upload them to CloudShark and look at them. And when I have a particular problem, I upload to CloudShark and I get a couple of other people to look at my packets as they're presented inside of that interface. Just like Wireshark, it just happens to be that it's uploaded, and we can discuss it collaboratively. So that's Wireshark, and we're going to dig into how it works in just a minute.